My name is Wayne Toth. I'm the coordinator of the Motive Power 2-year co-op program here at Niagara College. Something that we have in our curriculum is a lot of new technology that we're continuously updating. And some of that technology includes hybrid vehicles, how to work on hybrids and how to service them properly with the high voltage concerns that we have. So I'm going to go through a little demonstration here on depowering the high voltage battery so that you can go ahead and do repairs on the vehicle. So some things we have to get prepared for before we actually start the repairs on the hybrid vehicles is we got to have some safety apparatus in place. So right off the bat we need to identify in the bay that we're working on the vehicle with a high voltage sign. And the key thing to remember is all of the hybrid vehicles that are in service right now have high voltage batteries in them that run anywhere from 200 to 300 volts. And that type of voltage can be very seriously damaging to the body, and it actually can kill you. There's a lot of safety warnings on the vehicles today when you open the hoods of the vehicles, when you open the trunks, to identify that it is a hybrid, that it is high voltage, and you have to be very, very careful when you're servicing the vehicles. Some things that we have prior to working on the vehicles, we use a high voltage voltmeter. It's a .3 meter. It has to be capable of doing up to 1,000 volts, so we need that. We need safety gloves, high voltage gloves that are basically used by linemen in high voltage situations. So we have to have these also. We have to have the gloves on prior to working on the vehicle. The type of vehicle that we're using for the demonstration today is one of our fleet vehicles within the program. It's a Toyota Prius. It's Generation 1 hybrid technology that's on these vehicles. There's lots of these vehicles on the road. They're out of their warranty periods now, so general shops, automotive shops are seeing these cars coming in for brake work, for general servicing, oil changes. So it's very important that we cover this information with you. So again, the battery packs are typically in the trunk of most hybrid vehicles, and this also covers a lot of the electric vehicles that are on the road today too. First step is we're going to put on our high voltage gloves, and it's a three-step process. There's a cotton glove that you put on first, and then there's the actual high voltage glove, and these gloves are basically your own, the technician's gloves. They're sized, and also they're tested on a regular basis. Every 6 months, these gloves have to be tested for any minor leaks in them. With the high voltage system that we're working with, a tiny pinhole in the glove can actually be very seriously damaging to the person. So we've put on the actual high voltage glove, and then the third step is actually putting on a leather glove over top. And in the automotive industry, we're working on a lot of sharp objects on the vehicles. We're using tools. So it's good to have a little protection over top of the actual high voltage glove. I know it's very bulky and cumbersome, but this is the first step in making sure that we depower the system correctly. Once we've verified the power's off, then we can go ahead and take the gloves off and then actually do the repairs on the vehicle. Okay, next step is locating where the high voltage battery system is. We also have a 12 volt battery here too. Typically the 12 volt works the lighting system and the accessories, but the key thing we're concerned about today is depowering the high voltage battery. Toyota Priuses, the majority of the vehicles have the battery pack in the trunk. So open trunk, basically I'll pull this carpeting away so it actually exposes the high voltage battery, so it gives you an indication of what the battery pack looks like. And then we're going to identify the orange connector. On hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles, anything that's identified as high voltage has an orange color to it. So if you were to look under the vehicles, all the orange cables that run from the battery up to the engine are all covered in an orange casing. And in this case, you can see fairly easily the disconnect plug, and that's what we're going to go in and do. It's got a locking mechanism on it. We're going to flip that locking mechanism down and then just basically disconnect the unit from the main battery pack, and you've gone that step. Next step is the system has capacitors built in under the hood on the main units. We're going to identify that in 1 second. And we have to let a time frame pass, and it's usually 10 minutes before we actually can go in and check for voltages. This allows time for the capacitors to drain, and then you can go ahead and do the next step. Also, it's one good thing to keep the disconnect connector away from the vehicle while you're physically working on the vehicle. A lot of technicians tend to leave this part in the trunk, but we don't want any situation where somebody can actually plug this back in while you're physically working on the vehicle. So I typically say put it in your toolbox, put it in your pocket, keep it away from the vehicle, and then you don't have that concerns of being plugged back in. Okay, next step is to go under the hood of the vehicle. All right, this is a typical Toyota hybrid system that we can identify some of the components under the hood. This is the main inverter system that does all the powering up of the components for the hybrid. And you can see in the back of the inverter here is some of the orange cables. So the next step, we've let our 10 minutes basically expire. We know the capacitors should have drained by now. So the next step that we're going to do is take our voltmeter, take our high voltage meter, set it up to our voltage scale. We're going to be looking at roughly 300 volts, and then go in with the voltmeter, disconnect the orange connector, and then the next step is to actually go in and identify that there's 0 volts showing on the meter at this point in time. Now, I physically haven't taken the cable off, but that's the step that you would actually do physically if you're doing any high voltage repair work on the vehicles. All right, typically you would identify the orange connections, and then in some cases there are quick disconnect on the cables, so you could do the quick disconnect, pull the cable back. Some of them have a shield over top of it. You would have to take a 10mm bolt out of the shield, remove the shield, expose the connections on the high voltage cables, and then physically go in with your voltmeter. Again, this is strictly if you're doing some actual high voltage repairs on the vehicle. Typically, if you were doing an oil change, if you're doing tire rotations, then simply if you disconnected the high voltage battery connector at the back and then let your 10 minutes elapse, then you can go ahead and just do your general repairs. If you're physically working around areas where there is the orange cables or there's hybrid components that you're going to be physically removing, then this step is a necessity. So again, with the connectors, remove the connectors, go in with your voltmeter, verify that there's 0 volts showing up on the meter, and then at that point in time, you can go ahead and continue with the repairs. Once the voltage has been verified at 0 volts, now you can remove your gloves and you can continue on with your repairs. Diagnosing a hybrid vehicle, you can use a typical scan tool. Most generic scan tools will work on hybrid vehicles. It's a good idea if there's a telltale light on or anything with a trouble code light as far as a check engine light. It's a good idea to go through a regular diagnostic process. Hook up your scan tool, enter the information for the vehicle, and then you can actually go in and read out DTCs. And it also gives you a diagnostic path. You can get data from the vehicle, and it helps the technician do any repairs that are necessary. The other thing too is after you've done a disconnect of the battery, depowering, voltage checking, service of the vehicle, it's always a good idea just to hook up your scan tool, verify there's no DTCs on the vehicle that you may have created, and make sure all the telltale lights have gone out once you start the vehicle back up. Once the repairs and the service has been done to the vehicle, now we put the disconnect back into the battery pack and verify that everything's completed and working properly at the end. One critical thing is you need to put the gloves back on, because now we're working around that battery. That battery still has the high voltage in it, so we make sure that the gloves are back on the person, the technician, when you put the connector back on the vehicle. Make sure the lock is back in place. And that finishes up the job.